Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this. Wait, hold on. Oh, this little guy right here. This is the Demko Knives AD-20.5 in titanium. First off, though, before I go any further, I want to let you know that this was provided to me by my Patreon patrons, right? My patrons make it very easy for me to see a piece like this and just go, yeah, I should order one of those. I should pick one of those up for review and see whether it's, worth doing, right? They make it really easy for that, and I appreciate my patrons every day. So thank you very much, Patreon patrons. Next thing, size comparison. This is, it's about the size of a Demko Knives AD-20.5 because it is exactly one of them. Right, here it is against the original version of the AD-20.5. Here it is against the Demko Knives AD-20, and what we see here is this is markedly smaller. Right, if I put this one on top of the other, what we see is, yeah, this is smaller than the AD-20.5, and particularly in the thickness domain, oh boy, yeah, this is much, much thinner. So this is a very, very different, very different knife. We'll also throw it up against the Ontario Rat number 2 here, just for grins. We'll put it up against the Spyderco Delica, as well as the Spyderco PM2 here, which is wearing a fancy set of scales at the moment. Still a great knife. And then finally, I'll put it up against, well, I'm doing the Demko thing here. This is a Cold Steel AD-15 wearing a custom set of scales by a guy named Slashy Tones. So they're kind of cool. But anyways, so what we see here is, again, this is much smaller than your conventional Demko models, which for some of you will be a beautiful thing. For others, maybe not as important. But anyways, first off, this is going to be a relatively quick review, right? I'm talking about this titanium version. I already did a full review of the original AD-20.5. But this is different enough that I figure it does require some discussion, but it's not necessarily like there will be some repetition because it's fundamentally similar. Next thing, this guy is not a custom knife, right? Despite this saying Wampum, PA, right on the side of this guy is being made overseas in Taiwan. This guy originally launched with Knife Center, but I'm seeing them now available at other retailers. So there is that. And let's go on ahead and jump into the good and the not so good about this titanium version right here. To start with, on the good side, this is still way more reasonable than the full size. I like the full size a lot. This was a very, very good knife, remains a very, very good knife, but oh boy, is it a little unreasonable, right? The thickness of it is substantial. The weight of it is gigantic. This is a very, very large knife, and this is much, much more reasonable for most folks' everyday life. I mean, if we measure up the blade here, we're going to see this comes in just a hair over 3 inches. So it is a much smaller knife in a variety of different ways, and going to be much more legal, much more carryable. To me, at least, that's a big advantage. It may not be for you, but it is a thing to consider. Next thing, the ergos are still pretty solid, right? And particularly in this kind of a grip, where the shock lock is kind of sitting underneath your thumb, you're not actually touching it there. The ergonomics on this are very, very nice. You can also grip a little bit further back, and the shock lock actually provides a little bit of extra force, kind of keeping your hand where it is. Both of those are solid grips. And, the clip is done in such a way that, with this little flattening off at the top there, ergonomically speaking, it's pretty damn good. It feels like this should be a massive ergonomic issue, but it turns out not to be in most of the grips you use. If you're doing a hammer grip, yeah, that's not going to be particularly comfortable with the shock lock there, but you could also hammer grip a little further back and be fine. So there is that. Next thing, this is still a fully ambidextrous knife. This guy comes with a, in addition to coming in its little case here, which is a cool little tube sort of thing, it also comes with a second clip. It comes with a second clip that is available to be mounted on the left side there, so that this can be carried in either of your pockets. And because the knife itself is fully ambidextrous, with a thumb stud to either side, with the hole obviously going through both sides, and with the lock being mounted in the middle, this is a rare knife that a lefty will have exactly the same experience as a righty with, if my left hand were, not deficient in dexterity. I could show you that, but nonetheless, this is truly an ambidextrous knife, and you can put the clip on whatever side you want because they include both, which is a nice touch. Next thing, this guy has a good choice of action, right? You can open this guy with the thumb stud, right, and pop it open that way. You can open this guy with the little hole in the blade there, and didn't do that quite right. It's weird to do this under a camera. There we go. You do want a little bit of wrist action here. The detent is not particularly strong. But nonetheless, this guy comes, it's got a nice choice of action. By the way, I say not strong, not because it necessarily wants to come flying open. It's got a fair amount of bias towards closure. So it's not scary in that sense. It's just not a strong thing keeping it closed. You gotta need a little wrist on it. Or you can, of course, pull the lock back and just let the blade kind of flop out on its own, right? That's another option you've got. So there were a couple of different ways you can open this guy. Next thing, this has a nice blade to it. This is using a 3V steel, which is kind of an unusual choice in a folding knife, but whatever. It comes down to a reasonably thin edge. Not the absolute thinnest edge ever, but it's okay. It comes with a reasonable stock thickness as opposed to, I don't know, yikes. And it comes with a sharpening choil. It has a nice grind to it. It's just overall, it's a fine little blade. It works pretty well. That's a beautiful thing. And I'll say the shock lock is also still a great locking mechanism, right? It's very nice because your fingers are nowhere near the slicing path as you're closing or opening the knife, which is good. It's fully ambidextrous. It doesn't really ever come up as like, I'm not going to accidentally unlock this knife. It just doesn't work that way in my hand with normal approach, and particularly if you're gripping like this, there's no way this is coming unlocked. And it also has very, very good firm hold, right? There's no play, vertical or horizontal. This is a very strong lock, and I really appreciate that a lot. So the shock lock remains a very nice lock. And then finally on the good side, the titanium on this guy, relative to the original here, the original 20.5, which was done in a Grivery sort of thing, and a OS 10, this is just a big step up. Not only is the steel a step up, but it is very well made, right? If we look at this guy, for instance, the pivot is just kind of a single screw, whereas on this guy, the pivot is its own sort of thing, right? It's got its own little engraved pivot on there. That's a nice little detail, a nice little step up. The hardware looks a little bit nicer. The titanium looks a little bit, well, it looks a lot nicer than G10, that's for sure, but nonetheless, it's very, very well done. Instead of having this back spacer here, instead we have nice actual metal standoffs. This is probably partly for weight as well as weight reduction, that is, and just more generally, but it's a nice little thing with the pivot collar, with the standoffs, and good chamfering overall, right? It's very easy for somebody to make a set of slabby titanium scales and not chamfer anything and make a bunch of mistakes, but this isn't really this. The thing I was most scared about with this guy is knowing that it was being made overseas, presumably at the same factory that made this guy. It's very common for makers who use the same factory for a very high-end and a very low-end piece to end up with something that feels like a budget knife made with expensive materials, where the factory doesn't do everything right, where it's just kind of like, oh, well, you put Damascus on something and still made it like it was $50. This is not the case at all. This feels like an expensive knife. This feels like a knife that is very, very well made, and I'm very happy about that. I think they did a very nice job turning the titanium knife into something fundamentally different than the G10 one, even though, well, Grivery or whatever it is, than the polymer handle one. I think that's just very nice, and with the blade steel upgrade and everything, this is a different knife, very fundamentally, and that's great. So to me, all of that is the good, is that the titanium lends this a much higher end feeling, and they didn't just put the titanium on there. The shock lock remains a great lock. It's still a nice blade with a good choice of opening mechanisms. It's still fully ambi. The ergos are solid, and it feels like a much more reasonable size than the original big chungus of an AD-20 over here. On the bad side, it is still very weird that the AD-20.5 is smaller than the 20. In what universe do numbers work that way? I do not get it. Demko's work with me here, right? I just don't. No. That's not how that works. Next thing, it is still very strange to me to have Wampum PA, which is the name of the, area where the Demkos are based, engraved on the pivot here, right below Taiwan. I'm not saying that they're being deceptive in any way, shape, or form here, right? They've clearly marked it as being from Taiwan, but it's still strange to me to put a U.S. place name on a knife that I don't know has ever touched Wampum PA. Maybe it has. Maybe they're doing some element of that there, and they're just not clear about it, but to me that just feels a little bit strange. And frankly, for those for whom that's very important, I do kind of wish that there were a custom option from the Demkos available in this size range, right? I bought this guy, but I like supporting the artist, right? And I would sure love to support the Demkos with like a 20 CV custom version at this kind of thing. I think that would be a very nice thing, right? With a nice custom grind or something. But anyways, it's just a little weird to put an American place name on a Taiwanese knife. Whatever, not a big deal. It does still, speaking of not a big deal, have the blade handle gap that drives a lot of people nuts. I don't get this particular issue, but for a lot of people, this is like fingernails on a chalkboard. I don't get it, but whatever. That can be a thing. Moving on to things that are a little bit more struggle-matic, if you will. What we have here is a knife that has a pretty substantially back balance point. It's not terrible, right? But if we compare this guy to some of the other knives out there in the world, this guy is definitely a little bit further back, especially when you want to grip it this way. It's not terrible, right? But it just does feel a little bit on the back-heavy side. That makes sense, right? It's all metal in the back here. And although they did lighten some things up a little bit, maybe they could have lightened it a little bit harder and ended up with something a little bit lighter there. So there is that. Next thing, I'd like to see a little bit more in the way of steel choice here. 3V is an absolutely fine steel. It favors toughness, but performance seems to be about in line with my expectations. No problem there. But I would like to see the option for like 20 CV heat treated well as an option here for folks who don't need tough as much as they want an edge that sticks around forever and ever and ever. This is more of a finesse point than anything, but especially as the price starts to get very, very high, I'd kind of like to see more options there available. And 3V here is fine, but like I said, I'd like to see some more options there. Next thing, and getting into things that I think really are problems, what we see here is that there is absolutely no... so if we look at the original 20.5, there was this little area right here, which is a flat area that's, disguised here as branding, but is actually designed to be underneath the clip so that when you bring it into and out of your pants, you're not on the texture. On this knife, they did not do that. And at some level, I'm sympathetic, right? They don't want to make a big, ugly patch on both sides, and they don't want to give lefties or righties a favored approach. So, but still, it was a little disappointing. I would have liked to have seen that texture knocked down a little bit under that clip. It's not the end of the world, and it's something you could do yourself because you're probably only going to carry it one way, but it is definitely, that's a factor there. And then finally on the, I'm sorry, not quite. The next thing is that the sides of the shock lock here do need a little bit more smoothing, right? This is a very aggressive edge. It's not the end of the world. It's not going to, like, cut me open or anything, but I would definitely have liked to have seen a little bit of chamfer along the sides of the shock lock there, just to make this a little bit smoother and make it a little bit less likely to scratch up whatever happens to be in your pocket with the knife. Not the end of the world, and it's something I can do myself, but it's a thing. Then finally on the bad side, this is $375 US, and that is a bunch of cash, right? The knife is well made. It's not just a set of titanium scales slapped on an old version 20.5, right? They've made tweaks to get this guy very close to perfect, but whoo, boy, that's a price, right? Yikes. This has priced itself into serious competition, coming in substantially higher than the Benchmade Mini Adamas, $100 higher than the TRM Shadow, about the same as the TRM Full Titanium Atom and Neutron, and that's just US-made competition. Right? This is still way cheaper than, for instance, their custom knives. I don't even know what a full tie one of these guys is going for, 2 years after I got this one, but oh boy, is it pricey. Right? At this price, everything needs to be absolutely perfect. The heat treat and the steels need to be on point. The construction needs to be 100%. I'm going to be honest, it's not far off of that, right? Smooth a little bit under the clip and maybe chamfer the lock bar, and yeah, you got me. It's everything else is about good to go. But the fact remains, the knife is good, but this is expensive. And in a world where everything else is getting more expensive too, that's going to be a hard sell for a bunch of folks. So to me, all of that is the bad. $375 is just a bunch of cash any way you look at it. The sides of the shock lock do need some smoothing here. There's hard texture underneath the clip. I'd like some more steel choices. It's a little back heavy. It's got that blade handle gap that drives some folks absolutely batty over there. It's got some, it's a little strange to put an American place name on a Taiwanese made knife, and the name of it, generally 20.5, still a little weird. On the final conclusion front, this is a very nice little knife, right? It's got good ergos, good ambidextrous carry, a nice choice of opening methods, a nice blade, a good lock, and a lot of little improvements alongside being a full-tie knife. The name remains bizarre. It's still weird to put the name there. It's got a blade handle gap thing. It's back heavy, little choice in steel, no smooth area under the clip, very aggressive texture. The sides of the lock do need smoothed, and $375 is a bunch of cash. But my final conclusion here, more than anything else, else is that this guy right here was a very necessary thing for the Demkos to do. The original AD-20 is a great knife. I want to be very clear about that. I like this knife substantially. And the fact that this has remained in my collection, despite being this huge, this thick, this overbuilt, is a testament to how much I like the shock lock, to how much I like, frankly, the Demkos. Generally, they're pretty kind folks, and all of that, right? I feel like they could have definitely, well, it's a sign of quality there. The problem is, it is huge and it is overbuilt and it is designed for a world that is very much not mine. And up until this came out, we had to make a choice, right? And the choice was this. We could go with the polymer scales and the AUS 10A and pay a lot less money, or we could go full size, oh my God, Gigantor, and then pay a lot more money, right? And that was kind of frustrating. And even finding these was difficult, right? Probably still is. And that choice was not amazing, right? And for me, this hits a happy medium. This feels a lot like this big guy, right? I'll say the titanium texture here is a lot more aggressive. And in fact, that's maybe something they could knock down. I'm right on the edge of whether that's a problem or not. But this feels like a much happier medium. This really does feel like a scaled down version of the full size, right? This feels like it is in a similar area of quality. It feels like it's in that same kind of ballpark. This is a AD-20 that is just scaled down a little bit. And it feels fancy and nice, but it comes at a reasonable size, and it comes in, to be clear, about half the price of a custom Alti when I purchased it, right? And that is the biggest downside here. It is the price, which I have said is a bunch of freaking cash. It is a perfection price, and there are a couple of little details lacking. And that price, let's be real, is going to take this off the table for a number of people, right? That is definitely going to be a thing. So I'd love to see them get the prices down on this, and frankly, the entire AD-20.5 lineup in the future there, right? These are just coming in a little bit high. But honestly, given the choice between huge and twice as expensive and this, which is a little bit smaller, I'm going to choose this every day. And in fact, I am choosing this. My full-tie AD-20, this little guy right here, well, this gigantic big chungus of a guy right here, is being sold to a friend of mine shortly, with this guy filling its spot in the case. Both of these are great knives. Both of these are wonderful, but this one just makes a whole bunch more sense for my life, right? This, carrying it is kind of like it's a procedure. This, carrying it, is just like, yeah, that's a knife. I have a knife in my pocket and it works great. And so I do hope that in future runs, they're able to address the little tiny nitpicks of these guys, smooth the edges, give them, and I'll probably do that on my own anyways, but for now, I think that this is a very, very nice choice for knife collectors who want a full-tie shock lock, who want a luxurious and high-end version of the shock lock knife, but they don't want a full-size shock lock, and they're willing to pay that little bit of extra price. So on the whole, I like it a lot. It's pricey, but I like it, and it's still cheaper and way more practical, at least for my life, than the big guy. So there you go. Hope this has been interesting to you, and I hope that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.